The thaler is cold tonight. You have carried it since your father pressed it into your hand at the gate of the house in Halle, the morning you left for the muster. He did not speak. He turned the coin over once in his fingers, the way a man turns something over when he is trying to decide whether it is worth keeping or worth giving away. Then he gave it to you. Frederick the Great, 1762. The profile worn almost smooth from 30 years in a tanner's pocket. You did not ask what it meant. You put it in your breast pocket, and you have not taken it out since. Tonight you take it out. You hold it above the fire for a moment, not to warm it, not for any reason you can name, and you look at the profile, the nose, the powdered wig rendered in copper. The legend around the edge you cannot read anymore because the letters are gone. You know what it says. It says Frederikus Borisorum Rex, Frederick, King of the Prussians. You put it back. The men around the fire are not talking. Silence is not calm. Silence is every man doing his arithmetic and not wanting the others to hear the numbers. Private Kern is cleaning his Prussian infantry musket for the third time, running the rod down the barrel with the careful attention of a man who has nothing left to think about. Corporal Brandt is sitting with his back against a wheel of the supply cart, eyes open, not sleeping, staring at a point 6 inches in front of his boots. The fire is low because the wood is wet and nobody wanted to find more. You have been a corporal in the 1st Infantry for 6 years. 6 years is long enough to know the difference between the silence before a skirmish and the silence before something else. This is the silence before something else. The men who have been at Austerlitz, Brandt was at Austerlitz. You were not. You missed it by a reassignment that felt like luck at the time. They do not talk tonight either. The fact that they are as quiet as the men who have never seen a French line makes the arithmetic worse. You check your cartridge box, 24 rounds, standard issue, paper cartridges, 60-grain powder charge, a 7.53 caliber ball wrapped in a greased patch. The standard Prussian infantry musket fires, in trained hands, 3 rounds per minute. You have 8 minutes of ammunition. You have been at enough actions to know that 8 minutes is either everything or nothing, depending on what the French are doing and where. What the French are doing is what nobody above you will tell you plainly. You know they are below. You know the Grande Armée crossed the Saale in force yesterday, and that the reports reaching the regiment have been, in the language officers use when they mean the opposite, encouraging. You know that the position on the plateau above Jena has been chosen, and that the 1st Infantry will hold the left of the Prussian line under Prince Hohenlohe. You know that Napoleon is down there. Not a rumour of Napoleon. Napoleon. Private Kern asks if you think they will come at dawn. You tell him yes. You do not tell him what you actually think. What you actually think is that the position is wrong, and the order of battle is wrong, and that Frederick the Great would not have stood on this ground. You think this not because you are a strategist. You are a corporal. You read positions the way a tanner reads leather, by touch and smell, and the particular way a thing fails under pressure. But because you have been looking at the ground since dusk, and the ground is telling you something that the officers on horseback apparently cannot hear. The plateau narrows. To the north, toward Vierseinheiligen, the ground opens. To the east, it drops into the Mühlbach ravine. The French will not come up the ravine. They will come across the plateau, and when they do, they will have more room to deploy than you will have to receive them. Because the plateau narrows here, at the point where the 1st Infantry is standing, and a narrowed position means compressed volleys. And compressed volleys means the men in the back ranks cannot fire without hitting the men in the front. You know this. You say none of it. You tell Kern to sleep for 2 hours and wake you at 4. He will not sleep. You will not sleep. But the ritual of it matters. The pretense that there is a plan for the hours before the light comes, that the night has a shape. You lie down on your rolled coat beside the fire, and you close your eyes, and you press your left hand flat against your breast pocket and feel the edge of the thaler through the wool. Frederick, King of the Prussians. The fire goes down to coals. Someone adds a wet branch and the smoke comes sideways. You listen to the army breathing. The fog comes off the Saale in walls. Not mist, not haze. Walls of white that move across the plateau in slow sections, parting and closing, so that the world at any given moment is 30 yards wide, and then nothing. The 1st Infantry is formed in battalion column before first light, and you have been standing in that column for 40 minutes, while the fog does what fog does, which is make every man responsible for imagining what is inside it. You can hear the drums, French drums, not close, not yet. But there, below the plateau, down the slope toward where the Saale runs, a rhythm that is not the rhythm of a regiment moving to position. It is the rhythm of something much larger than a regiment finding its order before it moves. You count. You count the way you were taught to count at Breslau, at the garrison, 12 years ago when you were a private, and the sergeant who taught you was a man named Vogel, who had been at Rossbach in 1757 and who had very precise ideas about what a man could learn from listening. Vogel said that you could count the number of French guns by the interval between the artillery preparation and the first infantry advance. You count the drum rhythm, and you do not know what the drum rhythm is telling you, but you know it is telling you something. Brandt is to your left, 5 men down the rank. He is looking at the fog. The first cannon fires at 7 minutes past 6. You feel it before you hear it. A pressure in the sternum that is not pain, not quite. More like the moment a door slams in the next room and the air moves. Then the sound arrives. A deep crack that rolls across the plateau, and the fog swallows it, and it comes back changed, softer, as if the fog has already been absorbing things for hours. The shell lands somewhere to the right of the battalion column, beyond your sight line, in the fog, and you do not hear the impact, and you do not know what it hit. The battalion does not move. The second cannon fires, closer. The third cannon fires, and you hear the ball moving overhead, a low tone, almost musical, that drops in pitch as it passes. It goes long and you hear it hit the ground behind you somewhere in the space where the supply carts are, and a horse screams once and then stops. Lieutenant Kessler, commanding your company, rides past on his grey horse without looking at any of you. You have 3 things to do right now. First thing, check the man to your right. Private Mitter, 18 years old, from a village outside Göttingen, at his first engagement. He is holding his musket at order arms, and his face is the particular colour of a man trying very hard to breathe normally and failing. You step half a pace toward him and you say his name, once. Quietly so that it does not carry. He looks at you. You hold his gaze for 2 seconds, and then you look forward again. Second thing, check your flint. You open the frizzen of your musket, tilt it to the grey light coming through the fog, confirm the flint is seated firm and the powder charge in the pan is dry. The Prussian infantry musket, a 7.53 caliber smoothbore, misfires in wet weather at a rate of 1 in 7. The morning is damp. The fog is damp. You are calculating. Third thing, you put your hand flat against your breast pocket. Once, the edge of the thala, then you take your hand away. The drums are louder now. They came out of the fog, not the way you imagined them in the dark, not a line of blue coats resolving slowly from the white. They came out fast, in column, at the double. The first thing you saw was not men, but the glint of bayonets above the fog line, a moving forest of iron catching the thin morning light. Then the column was there, 40 yards away, and the distance was wrong. The distance was not what you had been told to expect. The volley order came. You raised your musket with the rest of the rank, 7.53 caliber, 60 grain charge. The French column, 40 yards away, still moving. You aimed at the centre mass of the column, not at a man, at the column, at the space occupied by the column, because at 40 yards with a smoothbore, the precise target is a philosophy, not a fact. The volley. The smoke came immediately, a white-grey wall that rolled back into your own face, and the burning smell of black powder was in your mouth and your throat. The world went from 40 yards to 10 yards in the time it took the smoke to settle. You heard the column, not saw, heard. You heard the sound of men hit in mass, which is not a sound you can describe to someone who has not heard it. Then you heard the column keep moving. They did not stop. 20 years of Prussian infantry doctrine said a volley at 40 yards stops a column. Vogel said it. The drill manuals said it. The column did not stop. The column slowed and absorbed what the volley had done to it and kept moving. You were already reaching for a paper cartridge and biting the end off, and the powder was in your mouth, and you were pouring it down the barrel by feel because you could not see the barrel through the smoke. 45 seconds to reload. The standard Prussian infantry musket, in trained hands. 45 seconds. You rammed the ball home. You primed the pan. You raised. The second volley. After the second volley, the smoke was complete. You could not see the company to your left. You could not see Lieutenant Kessler. You could hear shouting in French, not words, the direction of it, the pressure of it. And you could hear something that was not shouting, a lower sound, continuous. That was the French battalion's drum telling the column its pace. The drum was not slowing. Private Mitter fired his third round into the smoke at nothing he could see. You told him to hold. He did not hear you, or he heard you and could not hold. He was loading his fourth round with his hands shaking so badly he dropped the ball, and you watched him go to his knees in the smoke to find it. The sound of the French drums was now on your side of the smoke. Something changed in the geometry of the firing line. A pressure to your right. You understood, not thought, understood. Through the feet, through the body, that the line was giving. Not breaking, not yet, but moving. The way a door moves when the hinge is not quite right. A small wrong motion that tells you what is coming. The 1st Infantry did not rout. The regiment withdrew. The regiment fell back in good order. That is what the record says. You were there, and you know what the difference is between a withdrawal and a rout, and you know which one you were inside of. The answer is neither, which is almost worse. The line held for 40 minutes after the second volley. Then the line to your right, not your company, not the 1st Infantry, a Thuringian battalion attached on the right flank, broke. You did not see it happen. You heard the change in the firing pattern, the gap in the volleys where the Thuringian battalion had been. Then you heard the French drums moving into that gap, with the certainty of water moving into a low place. Lieutenant Kessler came out of the smoke on his grey horse, and the horse was hit somewhere, bleeding from the shoulder. Kessler was shouting a command that took you 3 full seconds to understand, because the artillery had been going for 4 hours, and your ears were a different instrument than they had been at dawn. The command was to fall back by companies, covering fire, to the road. You turned to Mitter and said the word, fall back. You turned to the man on your left, a private whose name you did not know, and said it again, fall back. You did not run. You stepped backward, musket at the ready, reloading while moving. The smoke was everywhere and the fog had not burned off, and the French drums were behind you now to the right, where the Thuringian battalion had been, and you did not look. Looking is how you stop moving. You stopped once. You stopped because Brandt was on the ground. He was sitting against a stone that had no business being there, in the middle of the plateau. A single stone as if someone had dropped it and walked away. He was sitting against it, with his legs straight in front of him, and his musket across his thighs and his hand pressed against his right side below the ribs. He was looking at you. You went to him. You took his arm. He shook his head. You have understood that gesture at enough distances to know exactly what it means and exactly what you do next, which is nothing, which is you stand up and you keep moving, because Brandt is telling you with the shake of his head that the help you can give him is smaller than the cost of giving it, and he is right, and he knows he is right. And the knowing is in his face, with the particular expression that is not bravery and not resignation, but something underneath both of those, something you have no name for in German or in any other language. You keep moving. The road to Weimar was behind the plateau, north, through Wurzenheiligen. When you reached it, you were not alone. The 1st Infantry was there, in pieces. Companies that had lost their shapes, men who had attached themselves to the nearest officer without knowing whose company they were in. Lieutenant Kessler was there on his wounded horse, grey coat darkened with the horse's blood, writing something in a small notebook, which struck you at the time as the strangest thing you had seen all day, stranger than anything that happened in the smoke, that a man would choose this moment to write. You counted. You counted the men around you the way Vogel taught you, not in sequence, not 1, 2, 3, 4, but in 5s, because 5s are faster and the mind can hold them. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. Then you stopped because the count was not a number you wanted to finish. It was the number you would carry with you. Whatever that number was, it was yours now, and you did not want to own it yet. The French cavalry appeared on the left of the road. Chasseurs à cheval, light cavalry, moving in open order, not charging, moving at the trot, keeping pace, herding. You raised your musket, and you understood immediately that the musket was empty. You had not reloaded. You had been moving and counting, and you had not reloaded. Now you had an empty musket and a fixed bayonet, and a French cavalryman at 30 yards moving at the trot. He did not come at you. He looked at you. You looked at him. He was young, younger than Mitter. He had a green plume in his helmet and a sabre he had not drawn, and an expression that was not contempt and not mercy, and not anything you knew how to read. He looked at you the way you would look at a field after rain, as a fact, as a condition of the ground. Then he turned his horse and moved further down the road. You stood on the road to Weimar in the October light, with an empty musket and a bayonet, and you were still alive. You did not know why. The army was everywhere. Not the 1st Infantry. The army. Prussian infantry. Hussars without horses. Artillery pieces moving without their caissons. Officers trying to form columns out of men who had lost the habit of column. The road to Weimar is a good road, wide enough for 2 carts abreast, and by mid-afternoon it was full in both directions. Men moving north away from Jena, supply trains trying to move south toward a front that no longer existed, and the 2 streams moving through each other with the particular deft determination of men who have each decided that where they are going is more important than where the other is going. You walked. You had found Kern somewhere south of Wurzenheiligen, standing at the side of the road with his musket slung and his coat open, not walking, not running, just standing, as if he had stopped to rest and the stopping had become permanent. You took his arm and started walking, and after a moment he walked too. He did not speak. That was fine. You did not speak either. You knew what the morning meant, not in the way an officer knows it, with maps and reports and the language of strategic consequence. You knew it the way a body knows a wound, not the full extent of it, Not yet, but the location of it, and the fact that it is there, and that it will be worse when the shock wears off. You knew that whatever the Prussian army had believed about itself this morning, the army of Frederick the Great, the army of Rossbach, the army that had not been defeated by a foreign power in 50 years, that belief was not available to it anymore. Not after this morning. The morning had taken something that does not come back when the wounded heal and the muster rolls are rebuilt. You had felt it happen. Not at the moment of the volleys, not when the line shifted, not when you saw Brandt against the stone, before any of that. In the silence between the first cannon firing and the second. In the 5 seconds of interval when the plateau was still, and the fog was still, and the French drums were still below, and you were standing in your rank with your musket at the ready. And you looked down the line at the faces of the men beside you. The faces were right. The faces were soldiers facing a morning, but something behind the faces was different than it had been at Breslau, different than it had been at the garrison actions in 1803 and 1804, different than it had been every other morning you had stood in a rank. The confidence was gone, not the courage, not the discipline. Those are different things and they lasted through the morning. But the confidence, the specific conviction that the Prussian way of war was the correct way of war, that the volley doctrine and the line formation and the manual of arms written in Frederick's time were still sufficient, that what had worked at Rossbach would work at Jena, that confidence had already left before the first volley fired. You had not known that until you stood on the road to Weimar, and you knew it fully. Kern finally spoke. He asked if you thought they would reform the battalion at Weimar. You said probably. He asked if you thought they would be ordered back. You said no. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, very quietly, almost as if he was saying it to himself rather than to you, that he thought France had won the war this morning, and not just the battle. You did not answer him. That was its own kind of answer, and he heard it. The sun came out for the first time all day, late afternoon, while you were still an hour from Weimar. It came through the clouds from the west, and it hit the road, and the road was gold for a moment. The mud golden, the ruts golden, the shoulders of the men ahead of you, gold where they caught the light. For a moment, the road to Weimar was the most beautiful thing you had seen in 6 years of soldiering. Then the sun went back in, and it was just a road. The town was already full when you arrived. Churches converted to dressing stations. Courtyards full of men sitting against walls with their equipment beside them, not organized, not in units, just sitting. Officers moving between groups, trying to reconstruct companies from fragments. You found a wall in a courtyard and sat down with Kern beside you, and you put your back against the stone, and you waited for someone to tell you what to do next. Nobody came. You thought about Brandt against the stone on the plateau. You thought about the Thuringian battalion and the gap it left, and whether the gap was the thing that broke the morning, or whether the morning was going to break. Regardless, and the Thuringian battalion simply found the way that was already there. You thought about the chasseur on the road who looked at you and moved on. You thought about Vogel, who was dead by now, who died at Austerlitz with the regiment he had trained and loved, and whether Vogel would have been surprised by this morning, or whether Vogel had already known, in the part of a soldier's mind that is always counting and always calculating, that something like this was coming. You thought about your father, not his face, his hands, the way he turned the coin over before he gave it to you, the exact motion of it, the hesitation that was not hesitation, but something more like the motion of a man saying goodbye to something and not yet knowing that is what he is doing. You reached into your breast pocket. The thaler was there, cold now, the cold of the evening and the cold of the stone through your coat. You turned it over in your fingers. Frederick the Great, 1762. The year the war ended and Prussia was supposed to have proven something permanent. The profile worn smooth, the legend gone. You could not read Fridericus Borosorum Rex anymore, because the letters had been in your father's pocket for 30 years, and now they were in yours, and the coin remembered neither of you, carried nothing, meant nothing, that it had not been asked to mean by the men who held it. You put it back. Kern was asleep, or doing what you had told Private Mitter to do the night before, the ritual of it, the pretense that the night has a shape. You looked at the courtyard. A surgeon was moving between the men along the far wall. Somewhere a horse was being watered. A fire was starting in the centre of the yard, and men were moving toward it without being asked. The oldest gravity in the world. You thought about this morning one more time. Not the volley, not the smoke, not Brandt. You thought about the 5 seconds of interval between the first cannon and the second, the plateau still and the fog white and the French drums not yet close, and the faces of the men in the rank, and the thing that was already gone from behind the faces. You sat with that for a long time. Then you stood up, because there was a fire, and it was October, and it was cold, and you were alive in a way you did not fully understand yet, and would not understand for a long time, and the fire was warm, and that was enough. For tonight, to move toward. You pressed your hand once against your breast pocket. You moved toward the fire.